Hey folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 19, released in April 1995 and featuring the future of interactive entertainment. And another classic cover of Edge, not as good looking as the Atari one, but still fantastic. And you have, I'm sure you know what this will be about. So, the opening column, just some hype about Apple, but interesting. They mention how odd it is that they're now working together with IBM on the PowerPC. Because once upon a time, Apple opposed IBM. They wanted to be the alternative. But how many loyal Macintosh owners will feel that Apple has sold out? Well, did they sell out in the mid-90s? If you ask me, they already sold out in the 80s, and I thought they were at their best in the mid-90s, to be honest. But okay, they definitely sold out since the iPod. There's no doubt about that. We still see some people using VR helms in the mid-90s. We'll be looking at that company later on. Sega, 3D graphics, and of course Apple. So, Sony making a trip to the United Kingdom. We see here Phil Harrison. I think this is the first time he appears in Edge Magazine. Well, he's still at it, right? Mr. PlayStation. And there's the Satellaview for the Super Nintendo, which would feature some quirky games for the Super Nintendo, which you could play for a short time, for an hour or so, during certain times. And really neat thing to have. Of course, you can't use it anymore. Another very odd commercial in the mid-90s. This time for the NEC's PCFX. Okay. Some more talk about the Saturn selling very well in Japan. Is this Japan only? Yeah. So 365,000 3DO, 500,000 Saturn, 300,000 Sony PlayStation, and 2,000 Jaguars. Yeah. So Saturn is still having a slight edge in Japan at the end of 1994. The 32X all-in-one system looking very nice. And the Saturn will be totally black outside of Japan, which I also thought looked really neat. Okay, what was this about again? More talk about towels, and now using their technology for the arcades. And towels lets you program software from multiple operating systems at the same time, and made in Britain, so Edge is very proud of them. So there's some look at the arcade games. Any interesting ones? We see Sega Rally, and this game called Cyber Commando, which would be like a sequel to Cyber Sled. More on that later. And developed 1995. There was more of an advert for this. I guess this is like a game developers conference of sorts. Of course, the GDC had already existed since the 80s, thanks to Chris Crawford. But we have Trip Hawkins here. Here we have, again, Develop 95. How expensive are the tickets? Okay. It's not that expensive, each visit. Oh, one-day pass is only £150. That's, most conferences go for much more than that these days. There's a timetable for all the things you do. Understand the process, the march of technology, the mechanics of money. It's not that difficult. Creation, inspiration, and breaking the crystal ball. with apparently all important people from the business, but I don't recognize most of them. We do have Chris Crawford, alright. Cool. The conflict between plot and interaction. I would have paid to see that. Hey, I have Dave Gibbons too. Alright, let's continue with the magazine though. The letters. People complaining about Edge giving too high grade, considering the Saturn better than the 3DO. No, sorry, I'm getting things confused. This letter was about how Ridge Racer getting much more praise than Need for Speed, while Need for Speed had more cars and more tracks. Yeah, and I have to admit, I would rather play Need for Speed than Ridge Racer, but Edge is more about the technology. And yeah, Ridge Racer had a lot going for it. Now this is really cool. So they continue to have letters about whether you should program in C or assembler. And here's a letter by Glenn Corpse, who actually works for Bullfrog, the head of R&D. And he has a very long story. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can read it for yourself. I think it's really interesting. He talks about how the C language, there's a lot of clever work now to actually improve on the assembler language for speed. And they ultimately saying that if we had gone for assembler, we might have gotten an extra 4%, an overall 1% speed increase, but a couple of debugging suicides and a 99 release date. So being a bit cynical there. Which game is this? Motortown GP, yeah, that was kind of weird at times. Okay, let's continue with the magazine. We are running low on time already. Previews. So Panzer Dragoon, an all-rail shooter, but easily the most pretty of the ones released in the mid-90s. Mostly because of the aesthetics, kind of a fantasy Japanese ride a dragon look to it. And yeah, it was simple gameplay, like a lot of the 32-bit games, but hey, it was so nice to go through. There, of course, would be the Saga edition, which is an RPG. Highly sought after. Daytona USA making its way to the Saturn, and we already see some complaints that it might not be looking as good as the arcade version, and that would be definitely the case. But they say, yeah, the gameplay will be good. And I have to admit, considering the controls you would have using a D-pad, the gameplay was close to the arcade. You could get the steering wheel, but I don't know if that made it analog. So Daytona for the Saturn. Some people love it. Some people considered it simply another game, and some people thought it was a mess. Heretic for the PC, a game using the Doom engine, but having a medieval fantasy theme, and it played a lot like Doom. And then to me, it didn't have enough RPG elements to warrant playing. Hexen is a bit better, especially Hexen 2. That's a fairly good game. But here's Heretic being shown for the first time. And here we have a true classic, Chrono Trigger. And Edge talks about how the team working on Final Fantasy and the team working on Dragon Quest would come together for this game. And this might be the best Japanese RPG of all time. Fantastic story and characters. Excellent sound, good graphics, nice to play. Probably the most perfect RPG ever made. I still prefer Final Fantasy VI though. Jumping Flash. I thought this game would be released earlier. It's a 3D platforming game for the PlayStation 1. Had fairly big levels. You can jump very high. And I always found the controls very awkward. So, was it made by Konami? No, by Sony. Yes. And I thought it was very typical of the times because, yeah, it was a very clumsy platforming game, but it had a certain charm. Want to develop games on the Saturn? Yeah, how expensive is this? Is there a price somewhere? I don't see a price. Oh, here. starting at £3,000. Hey, Damocles. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Okay, so you had the Mercenaries trilogy. Oh, excuse me. This just fell down. And the first one was a huge hit. Made in 1986, I believe. And it's sort of like Elite. You can travel around, but you can also land on planets to do certain things. The Damocles was the second version, and it was released for the Amiga. I don't think for the Commodore 64. And then there was also a third one released in 1990. And that got even better. It had really nice, colorful polygons. Now, this seems to be a remake. And this is for the PC. So this is a remake of Mercenary Part 2. And it was kind of like what Grand Theft Auto would have been if it were science fiction. So, but it's not that interactive, and a lot of places are just kind of empty. But Part 3 had a very interesting story about science fiction dystopia. A lot of references to Margaret Thatcher's England. This was never released, this PC version, unfortunately. But the Mercenary series, definitely take a look into if you're interested in computer game history. Way before its time. I still think Elite was more elegant. Okay. Cyber Commando. So we saw this game earlier. Kind of like Cyber Sled. New cars to ride and shoot at each other. I kind of like this game a lot. Because you could just sit next to each other and shoot at each other in the arcade. And a lot of different kinds of weapons to try out. So to me that was more fun than playing Doom. But yeah, this is the arcade, of course. So that would cost you money. Playing over and over again. Here's a company called Division, and apparently, let's see, where are they? Are they in the UK or something? Usually Edge, especially at the time, if they had a thorough examination of a company, it would be a British one or French one because they were close by. This company excelled at making VR technology, and the graphics look stupendous. I mean, hold on a sec, is this in-game? They had some in-game graphics that look great. Yeah, here we go. Now that's some guy playing games, but here, look at that. That's what I envisioned VR at the time. And nowadays it looks really nice. So it's quite playable. I don't know whatever happened to this company. I'd like to know. Some more screenshots of what VR could look like. Battletech. No, it's not getting sharp. Do you actually climb? Yeah, I think in this Battletech game you actually climb into a pod of sorts and then you control a machine. Cool. That must be worth a lot on eBay. Okay, and we have Apple. I have 1.5 minutes to discuss this, so let's get through it. Apple, they spent a lot of time on Steve Wozniak and their history as a hippie company, and then having the Apple II sell so much and taking over America as an educational tool. The Apple III was a flop, so was the Lisa, but then there was the Macintosh, which kind of put the company back on track. This guy, he came from Pepsi, and he ousted Steve Jobs, for better or worse. And this part is mostly about the future, having all these PowerPC computers, which, did I have this one? I don't remember, but I had a fantastic Apple in the late 90s. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. Next time we'll discuss the reviews in Edge Magazine number 19.